But what I've noticed is I don't get the wilting that I used to get during the 2 or 3 in the afternoon when the plants are like, crap, this is way too much sun on me, I'm dying here. Hey everybody, this is Brent in Central Arkansas. Today is the 10th of July 2023, and this is a garden update. Let's start with maintenance. Maintenance of the no-weed garden, or the lazy garden, as I often like to call it, the lazy garden, requires a couple different things to keep it going. One is trimming off excess older vegetation. Another part of why I trim off excess vegetation is to keep disease down and air circulation going. Let's take a walk between the tomatoes here, and you can see on the right hand side here I've got tomatoes trimmed to one stem. I had it double stems, but there was so much vegetation in here. When the disease started creeping in, I did a short on it. No, I did a regular video on it. I think it was bacterial spot, I'm not dead sure. But when disease started creeping in a lot of areas, the spraying it, maintaining it, and keeping it knocked back was very difficult. I was going through a lot of fungicide to try to keep it down. So part of reducing that was trimming off the double vines and making it a single vine per each individual plant. I think that's going to work well for me. It'll keep the amount of spray I use down. I'm spraying later this evening. I usually do it every 7 to 10 days. I watch the leaves for any spread, and so that's part of maintenance. Keeping it manageable so that it'll keep disease pressure down and allow air to flow between these high trellises here, and I think it'll work better for me. Now, I am not composting anything that may have disease on it. So you'll see that it's on the grass out here in my in my lawn. And there's some over there and there's some over here. And obviously I toss it out where's closest in the yard from where I'm trimming. And so what I'll do is I'll wait for these to wither up really nicely, like cut grass does. Then I'll take a lawnmower and I'll blow it away from the garden, just like that. On the other side I'll do the same. I carried the tomatoes specifically out pretty far, the ones that I saw that were pretty disease ridden. Another part of maintenance is securing it to the trellis, and that becomes really a big deal when the vines are really long and they're starting to grow. They grow all the way to the top, like you'll see in this particular butternut. They grow all the way to the top, and then this one's another 10 foot or more. No, more than that. This panel's 16 foot and it's to the end of it. Then I'll secure it or wrap it in between, and so it keeps a nice vertical line here, and it keeps everything open instead of falling all over and doing all this mess. I can see each plant's vine, determine which one it is, and it's just much easier for that. You can see on this eggplant I've removed a lot of the side shoots, similar to the way I do tomatoes, and that keeps the foliage down, and it's going to grow vertically. And then, which is something I'll do tomorrow, it's on my tomorrow's plan, I will take and I will secure it to the trellis. Growing squash vertically, even squash that are bush plants, is a big plus when you're growing on trellises in close quarters especially. And the way I do it is I trim out the lower leaves, and what that does is it causes the energy of the plant to go to the growing tip, the apical stem, and it tries to grow up. What it also does, I did a video on this like 9-10 years ago. What I also found is it encourages the plant to try to make fruit so that it can create seed for the next generation. In other words, it's trying to survive. So it spurs growth. So once they get a little taller like this, I'll just secure it back to the trellis. Now some plants vine. You can see here, this is growing up here as a butternut, and it'll grow a foot or more a day. And so you have to train it like I showed just a minute ago. This is a mixta, a Sibley squash, and it's growing way down. So when it gets down to the end, I'll turn it around and it'll come back the same direction. Well, at the same time, I'm removing all these major leaves. So the only thing that'll be taking up trellis space is a vine, except for the last 4 to 6 feet of the plant, which will be the new leaves. So all of the energy will be going into the new leaves and the existing fruit. To keep a harvestable crop going, you have to harvest the fruit. If you don't harvest the fruit, like is the case here where I'm trying to save seed, and then those other two right there and there, what happens is the plant will not make, or barely make, any new fruit that you would want to eat, like say a summer squash. This particular plant, I'm eating it as a summer squash, and I'm going to try it as a winter squash as well. This is Feroce delicata, breeding of my own. But since I have let this one start maturing, like I said, there's no more fruit coming on, and that's fine for this one. This one is my harvesting fruit. I won't let any mature on it. I'll just keep cutting the immature fruit off, and it'll keep trying to grow new fruit. These two plants here are Masson's Cross, and Masson's Cross is a very small bush plant normally. But because I'm treating it the way I'm treating it, it is growing taller. And it does that, like I said, because you're trimming off the leaves and it's putting energy into the main stem. It also tends to create more fruit so they can try to get to harvest. Like this fruit here, I'll be taking that today or tomorrow, and it'll put energy into another fruit. Another part of maintenance is insect control, and I've done a pretty good job. One of the things I do is I'll spray the perimeter with a household insecticide, the same as we use to keep bugs out of the house. It is way away from the plants themselves, and it's not toxic to animals or people. It's not best to eat with gardening, but the way I garden in containers, with it coming down and out and well away from the containers, spraying the perimeter with a little bit stronger insecticide, like the ones we use in the house and around the house, helps keep the traffic of bugs down. It doesn't keep all the flying insects down, but the vertical trellising helps quite a bit already. I've only had to spray one time, and I sprayed, what's it called? It's chrysanthemum based pyrethrin. Anyway, I can't think of the name of it. Some bugs they're going to hit are the flying bugs, your squash bugs, your squash vine borer. Like this particular, my butternuts were hit. Of all plants, you'd think butternuts, having a smaller stem that's not hollow, the squash vine borer wouldn't hit it, but they hit the butternuts the hardest. You can see here, there's a little bit of a hollow space here. Part of that was I have to go out and I have to look. Well, I look somewhat occasionally. I wasn't anticipating on the butternut, like I said, but I have to go in here when I see frass or caterpillar poop coming out of a hole. What I do is I take a razor blade and I cut it. I have a pair of needle nose pliers, and I'll bend it open like that, and I'll look for the bug. A lot of times I can just grab it with the needle nose and destroy it. Sometimes I can't see it, and what I'll do is I'll take, and in the slice, I'll take the needle nose point, one half of it, and jam it up both sides. Now, sometimes it kills the plant off, and I've had 2 or 3 losses down there. But my compromise to that is killing the bug, obviously, which saved this plant and 1 or 2 others. But I also replant. This is a butternut seed. I think I did a short on this where I show I replant in containers. Part of what I'm doing today is replanting. As a breeder, I cull weak plants, plants that aren't meeting my expectations. You can see an empty pot here, here, here. That one was, I replanted in that one. This one was, I replanted in that one. If you look over there, there's one there. There's lots of areas, especially down here though, where I've removed plants. In its place, I've got new plants growing here that I'm going to replant. I've also got seed. I've got a few more butternut pots that I want to plant. I want to put another butternut seed in each one of the butternuts again. And I've got Madison's Cross seed there because I want to replant Madison's Cross. We love it so much, I want to keep it going. Now my cucumbers have gotten up to as tall as here. I've removed maybe one or two. I'm trying to look here. It looks like they all still have a plant in it. These two are not on the end. Yeah, so I have 8 cucumber plants here. If you look in here, I planted 2 more cucumbers the same time I did the butternut. And what that's going to do is, as these start to get tired and aren't producing as much, then the newer cucumbers are going to come along. In fact, before I cut out this old plant, the newer cucumbers are going to be up here and flowering by the time I do that. So I've already prepared. I've got new cucumbers going, and that is a great way to extend your season and keep production up. It's consecutive planting using the same exact container that you already have stuff growing. In fact, when I started as a breeder, time saving, or space saving rather, techniques, I just started doing it. It's not too often you see people replanting in containers, the same exact containers, but I had a greenhouse over there and my containers were limited. So as I noticed these things, well, I said, well, let me just replant in the same container and see how that works. In a lot of cases, I replanted in the same container after removing. So I know it's feasible. It works really good for me. Now here's a Madison's Cross plant, and it's one of the younger ones that I planted later than the other ones. This one was actually older seed that I was going to cross to the newer seed to see if I can keep a little bit more diversity going. So it's a little newer, but I'm also going to go ahead and replant. Now I'm going to put 4 in here to ensure I have germination. And I'll eventually cull it back to the 2 strongest, and then eventually probably just the 1. Now the way I do it, let me switch hands here, is I just take, and usually underneath where the drip falls, I'll add a seed or 2. Like so. Whoop, I'll grab the bag instead of the seed. And I'll just put 2 in this hole. I'll make another hole and just cover it up just like that. I'll do it again. I'm not sure if it helps to do it again, but might as well repeat. Just put a couple more in there and cover it up just like that. So now in 3 to 5 days or so, those will sprout through and they will begin growing. In the beginning, they're not going to take up much resources, which will allow this older version, this older plant, to continue producing for me while the new ones are coming along. For whatever reason, I can't explain it, some plants just do not do as good as other plants. Like this plant has been growing really slow and compact. It could be several things. It could be something in the mixture here, the soil mix. It could be that this plant itself had a defective gene come on. I'm not exactly sure, but what it should look like is this one here. They're the same age. Because of that, I'm going to go ahead and plant like I did before just now. I'm going to plant 2 or 3 spots here, and if this one doesn't decide to get going, then I'll cull this one earlier. At the same time here, I had a very, very poor plant. I removed completely, I just never replanted, so I'm going to plant several in here. I've been getting Madison's Cross off of these 2 regularly, and I'm getting a ton of other squash. But some of the other squash I'm letting mature now, so that's going to drop off. So these extra plantings in the same container will replenish my squash for the future all the way up until fall. Now replanting in the same container also gives me a chance to make adjustments. These piccolinos, look at them, they're freaking awesome. And if you let them get really, really mature like this, that's as big as they get, and then they're going to start getting bad after that. They're not a great tasting cucumber to me, but they are so productive, they are worth growing. So I'm keeping them growing so I can continue to eat them. In fact, I cannot keep up and I cannot give them away. So I planted way too many. I did not know they were going to be this productive. So my adjustment is going to be two things. One, plant less cucumbers, plant something else in it. So I've planted a honey nut butternut and a couple of them. And another adjustment is a different type of cucumber that I can compare with. Hopefully at the same time, hopefully the piccolinos will still continue to grow. So I've made adjustment in those two ways, which is a great opportunity. Making adjustments and planting in the same container is also a great thing. In these three containers here, I've got a butternut type, it's actually butterball, a breeding of mine, crossed with Tahitian melon. And this is what that fruit looks like. This one's not the greatest, so that vine isn't the greatest, but I'm not going to kill it off until I check the taste of it. Here's one that's got half the neck of a Tahitian, very, very thick, a little bit big end, but look at all that meat there. If I can get a great butternut texture with a Tahitian taste, Tahitian's a little bit more stringy. So anyway, I'm really liking this, the way this one looks, and the vine is very aggressive. It's the one that's growing way down there. But what I've done is, at the same time, you can see here, I've got a big seed packet of honey nut, because I've tasted honey nut and it is a phenomenal squash. It's very, very a winter squash. It's a butternut type. It is very, very small. It is too small for my taste, actually. But I planted a lot of the vines because the vines aren't super aggressive. They don't overtake. They're not like this particular plant itself. So I planted honey nut in these three containers because I want more honey nuts in storage because they're small and they taste so good. Continuing with replanting, in the consecutive planting and replanting discussion, I've got three containers here that I removed tomatoes from. I removed all these 5, which were honey bear. They just didn't do well for me, so I'm discontinuing that particular line. So I've got a tomato planted there, which will become useful. It's a cross for Tunia and Brandy Bear. So that is a hopefully that'll be a very large paste that'll eventually come out of it. But I've also got another one here. What is this one? This is Hearted Cherry Bear. It's a cherry tomato that's shaped heart shape. You know how a little fat at the end? Anyway, I've got 3 containers here, and I'm going to plant 3 different types of open pollinated yellow squash that I'm going to cross to my cultivar, Madison's Cross, to create potential hybrids. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant those 3, these 3 you see in here, and I'm going to plant them in these containers, and then mature, I get to see what the fruit looks like. I'll save seed from the cross with mine, and then I'll grow out the F1 hybrids to see how they look. In the past, I did cross my squash, Madison's Cross, with early prolific straight neck. In the cross, the hybrid created a yellow and green squash that was very much like Madison's Cross. It tasted great. I just did not care for the yellow and green spotted or mottled, whatever you want to call it. It just didn't look as tasty. So I'm going to try 3 more different kinds and see how those hybrids turn out. My goal is to find out what hybrids I can create for the market. Another to do in the garden when you're growing up a trellis is supporting the heavier fruit. And I guess you'd call it a maintenance item as well, because if I didn't do this, what will happen is that would break off or it'd pull the vine out. In some cases, like I'll show you the melon in a minute, once they mature, they slip, so they'll easily fall, and by the time they're ripe, they'll bust wide open. Ask me how I know. Anyway, so I put hammocks on this fruit. Now this is the small seeded watermelon, and I can tell already, growing this year, that the fruit has sized up. Right now it appears to be a little bit closer to the bigger parent than the smaller parent, but this is the pattern, or a mixed pattern between the two parents. And so I'm getting variation on stripe patterns, which is good. It's telling me that there's some crossing going on. And the fruit being this size, which just looking at it, I think this is probably 3 to 4 pounds. I'd like to have 5 to 8 pounds, 6 to 8 pounds, somewhere in there. But this is good for this year. Here's a great hybrid stripe version right here. Now, when I planted the seed, these 5 containers were the really tiny seed. So in order for a fruit to get this size, it means it had to have crossed. Otherwise, it'll stay more closer to this size. It'll never get bigger than that. So this over here was the larger seed that there's only 1 or 2 plants, 1 or 2 containers, 2 or 3 plants that had the larger watermelon, because I wanted to make sure the smaller watermelon crossed with it. And so when I planted all these out, the stripe pattern tells me that I've probably got some crosses there. So now the thing to do is to wait for them to mature, cut them open, have a taste, check out the seed size, weight each one, and that way I'll know what seed to save for next year. Here's my melon cantaloupe cream. I've got some growing here. I've got one hammocked. I've got another one hammocked here, another one hammocked here, and they're starting to size up now. I got fruit everywhere. A lot of them I have hammocked, a lot of them I don't yet. I love the fact that I'm getting so much fruit, and that the fruit appears to be more consistent than last year. I like that a lot. Unfortunately, if you don't keep up with this particular land race, or what could be an emerging cultivar or variety, is that it's going to produce a lot of leaves. And when you get this much foliage, it blocks the air, and there's potential for powdery mildew. Now that could be a good thing. It'll tell me how powdery mildew resistant the line is. So it's got pluses and negatives. I want to get the fruit. I want to get as much fruit as I can, because it absolutely tastes wonderful. Here's some down here that are getting a little big, and they're supported by the soil in this container instead, but a lot of them are way up. Here's another one that's hammocked. So yeah, if you're going to grow any fruit of any weight up a trellis, like a melon or a watermelon, or a big butternut, or just any fruit that's heavy, you need to hammock that bad boy. This is okra. This is Uncle Don's. He gave it to us. He got it from a friend of his that was Native American back in the early 70s. And I think he said Cherokee, but I don't know for sure. It just seems like everybody says Cherokee. It's like, seems to be the most popular Native American tribe, that or Apache, to quote. Not that it matters there, but you can see the fruit here is coming on. I've harvested a couple. There's one over there. What's really great about this particular variety or cultivar is that when it's in the sun, it gets bright red. You can see some of it here where there's more sun exposure here, where the stem is much more red. But when it's not in the sun, the leaves stay green. So it's sun-induced, kind of like, I guess, tomatoes, or I can't remember what that nutrient is called that activates when sun hits it. But the fruit also, unfortunately, isn't cool looking because the sun's not hitting it. And when the sun hits it, it's green and red splotched. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous color. The best thing about this variety, though, is this variety can get really long, 10 inches, 12 inches, and still remain tender. So my no-eat garden that I started, I don't know, 10 years ago, has turned into what I call the lazy gardening. I've added other things to the garden to make it lazy. What I call lazy, it's not really lazy. But anyway, I added trellises. I'm growing everything possible vertically, which saves space. I've added shade cloth over the overall grow because I get so many sun hours. Look at the sun here right now where my hand is. You can probably see my shadow here. It's quite bright. Underneath the shade, this is my hand. You can see my shadow again. It's still pretty darn bright. That's 50% shade cloth. And what it has done, and what I've noticed over the last couple years, is that I still get fantastic growth with the number of sun hours. I get 12 to 14 a day here because there's no blocking any of the garden at all during the whole entire day. But what I've noticed is I don't get the wilting that I used to get during the 2 or 3 in the afternoon when the plants are like, crap, this is way too much sun on me, I'm dying here. I don't get near that. And what happens with that is without the wilting, the plants are less stressed and therefore they do better. Now, they get the sun they need because of the amount of sun hours in the shaded area. They get all the sun that they need, but they also don't get all the UV radiation from the sun and the direct heat on top of it. In the morning when it's dewy, the leaves are covered with moisture, but they dry out before the sun gets too hot. And even if it didn't, the shade is kind of keeping it protected. It's just, I have found, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I have found I will never ever do any form of gardening. I don't do any at all weeding. What I do is, like at the bottom of each container, you'll see this kind of stuff, and I'll just take my foot and I'll scrape around it if it bothers me. And sometimes it does bother me, but the container drips moisture from the bottom, and so that's all I have to do to clean it up. Now that'll wither and blow away, but really there's nothing there. The weeds don't get in the container because they would have to blow on top of this, on top of the felt or whatever you want to call this fabric, and then they would have to jump into the container. And it's just an excellent way to garden, I've found. But what it does for me most importantly is this right here. See that? That's my breeding work. Almost everything in this entire area is stuff that I absolutely enjoy doing, from breeding tomatoes and squash to melons and watermelons and eggplants. Just all of that. I was breeding cucumbers, I was breeding okra. I backed off of those two because I'm just swamped in other areas, but just all I do when I come out here is it's my happy place. It's my happy place because it's not hard to manage. I have to make some adjustments, like I already mentioned about removing the leaves and trying to control the disease. I was going to grow 2 stems, now I'm growing single stem, just to keep that down, keep it more manageable. But look at them. I mean, this is a tomato that happened to be the closest one, and this one's a little more prone to disease, but everything is just wonderful. So, enough of a plug on that. I just find it exciting. So what I'll do here is I'll walk down the aisles and just quickly talk about things if I see, just so you can see more of what's going on. Now those are the squash that I just replanted I was telling you about. So on this far row, there's 4 of these rows. On this row, I call this row 4. Row 1's closest to the pond, row 4. Row 4 has got my butternuts. This is a honey nut variety. I've got an avocado I planted from seed. I just brought it out here. I cut it back, so all I'm doing is trying to make it grow larger around the base. I've got all the cucumbers here. They're growing. I overplanted the cucumbers. We'll make an adjustment next year. Disease-resistant variety, F1 generation, so I only needed a couple plants. I'll save the seed and grow out a lot next year. A couple butternut squashes, Tahitian melon with butterball. My royal purple eggplant, that is a cross of Listada de Gandia and camo eggplant, Spanish and Japanese eggplant cross that's been really fantastic. It's got the really dark calyx here, the dark stems, and the flesh is brilliant white. It's very, very tasty. Took a lot after camo for that, which I'm very thankful for. Peppers, I've got a slightly spicy bell, And I got another plant called Three Colors. When those mature, I'll share more information on that. My beans here, these are Vortex boll beans, straight out of the package. It's not my breeding. And they took a ton of damage from the storm. Just totally ripped them apart, and I lost a lot of productivity. I lost all the productivity. But you can see that the leaves are starting to come back. I'm getting younger leaves, more vining coming out. So I expect to get some good harvest off of that before too long. Here's a couple. I got my squash, Madison's Cross, Feroce Delicate, which I've already talked about, which is a cross of my squash, Madison's Cross, and this one here, which is a Delicata from Cornell. It's a powdery mildew resistant so-called bush Delicata. And so Feroce Delicate's got that as a parent, and my squash as a parent. This is a butternut here. This is a butternut that I'm going to cross with honey nut in an attempt to get a larger honey nut like squash. So it's going to be an F1 hybrid if I can get it to cross. We'll see if that happens. This is Sibley. Sibley is a Maxima squash. It's a different species than my butternut. I want to cross a butternut to it, and that's an interspecies cross. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. We'll see, but it's going to be an attempt because Sibley is supposed to be a phenomenal banana-like squash. So I want to cross those and see what happens. I've got the lemon squash here. I'm regoing from the year 2015 just so I can save the seed. I do that from time to time, regrow old seed just so I can save the seed. That's part of it. This was a hybrid of the lemon squash and my squash. I just wanted to see what it does. It's got a nice coloration to it. More aggressive than the lemon, and it tastes really good. It tastes better than the lemon, actually, thanks to my squash. Then, of course, I've got 3 rows starting with this one, the one over, and the one over that are a cross of a disease-resistant variety with mine, Brandy Bear. And right now, it's looking really good. I got lots of examples. And all I need is 1 or 2 that show parthenocarpy. So I am doing a ton of evaluation on this, and every single tomato I weigh it, I check the bricks, I check if it's seedless or not. I do a lot of stuff. I put it in a spreadsheet. I get overall weights, average weights, colors. I take pictures of it, ripe, just all of that. Part of that also, I've got Better Boys growing here in these 5 containers. Those are the standard that I'm banking it against mine to see a productivity comparison. Even though Better Boy is an F1 hybrid, mine are F2 at this stage. I don't have the hybrid vigor that an F1 has with mine, but right now they're still doing awesome in comparison. In between the first and second row are my primary cherry tomatoes that I'm really looking forward to. This is a double hybrid cross, Yellow Cherry Bear is what I'm calling it. I've got several examples of that. And down there's Red Cherry Bear. What I'm doing is I'm using these cups. I'm pulling off the ripe fruit or nearly ripe fruit, and I'm putting them in the cup. Now I'll mark the container here with a marker. And that marker, when I get in the house, I'm going to put these on a paper plate, and I'll take this off of the cup and put it on the paper plate. That way I'll know that the fruit from that particular cup, this particular plant, is on that paper plate. And then what I'll do with that paper plate is I'll take a picture of the fruit and I'll cut it open and evaluate it. Here's a very productive Red Cherry Bear, this particular plant here. I don't see any disease on it anywhere, which is great. I like the size of the fruit. I like a little bigger cherry. It makes for a great snack and a great salad. But I'm also going to do that with the cup for that one. So let's polish off this garden update with a walk down tomato lane. I got fruit that's starting to mature here, starting to turn color. It's going to keep me really busy documenting that for my breeding efforts and my seedless tomato work. And where I'm going with that, you can see down here more cherries, lots of fruit. Now we're getting into the beefsteak slash slicer size. Super Bear. That's a gorgeous looking one right there. Another very nice one here. There's a couple examples over there that are really awesome too. So I'll talk to you more about that later on. The better boys are looking good. The fruit, the watermelons and the melons, I'm really looking forward to. So that's pretty much it. I've got more projects going on and all that, but I just wanted to give you, I have no idea how long this video is, but I wanted to give you kind of a thorough update of what Brent does in his garden. We'll see you in the next one.
How long do we gotta stay here for people we don't know in one lines? All of the clothes are designer, fast cars and who knows who. Yeah, I know what they wanna say. They're gonna ask me if I'm gonna make it. I don't care if I'm gonna have to fake it, long as I can be real with